The straight razor was halfway to his throat when Michael Sterling realized everyone in the barbershop had gone silent. Too silent. In the mirror, he could see 5 men who weren't there for haircuts. Their eyes were fixed on him with the kind of attention that meant someone wasn't leaving this chair alive. The barber's hand was steady, professional. The question was simple: cut hair or cut deeper? 3 months earlier, Michael Sterling thought he understood Harlem. He was wrong. Sterling was the New York Times' youngest investigative reporter, 28 years old and hungry for the story that would make his career. He'd covered corruption in Albany, exposed union bosses in Queens, brought down dirty cops in Brooklyn. But Harlem? Harlem was the story nobody could crack. The numbers racket that moved millions every week. The man who controlled it all from the shadows. Bumpy Johnson, Sterling's editor Frank Morrison, had been obsessed with the Harlem story for years. "Every time we send someone up there, they come back with nothing," Morrison said, pacing his corner office. "Either they can't get close enough, or they disappear." Sterling had laughed at that. Disappear. This wasn't Sicily. This was New York City, 1965. Morrison's expression went cold. Jimmy Martinez went up there in 1962. 3 weeks later, he was found floating in the East River. Officially, accidental drowning. Unofficially, Jimmy couldn't swim. But Sterling was different. Sterling was smart. Sterling had a plan. The plan was simple: become someone else. Not just undercover, complete transformation. Michael Sterling, privileged white reporter from the Upper West Side, would disappear. In his place would be Michael Patterson, small-time hustler from Pittsburgh, recently arrived in New York, looking to make connections. Sterling spent 6 weeks preparing. He studied street language, learned the rhythms of Harlem, practiced walking differently, talking differently. He worked construction jobs under fake names, let the sun darken his pale complexion, let calluses form on his writer's hands. The backstory was perfect. Michael Patterson had done time in Pennsylvania for running illegal card games. Just enough criminal record to be credible, not enough to be threatening. August 15th, 1965. Sterling walked into Harlem for the first time as Michael Patterson. He rented a room above a bakery on 125th Street, started hanging around pool halls and corner bars, dropping hints that he was looking for action. It took 2 weeks to make his first contact. A runner named Jerome picked up on Sterling's interest. "You seem like good people, Mike," Jerome said over beers at Small's Paradise. "But this business, you need someone to vouch for you." That someone turned out to be Big Willie Jackson, a mid-level operator who ran a book out of a storefront on Lenox Avenue. Willie was careful, smart, suspicious of newcomers, but Sterling's Michael Patterson persona was convincing. "Pittsburgh, huh?" Willie said, looking Sterling up and down. "What brings you to our neighborhood?" Sterling's answer was perfect. "Heat got too much down there. Cops started paying attention. Figured New York was big enough for a man to disappear." Willie liked that answer. Within a week, Sterling was running numbers for Willie's operation. Small stuff at first. Collecting bets from regulars, delivering payouts. But it was access. Sterling was inside. For 6 weeks, Sterling lived the life. He learned the system, understood how millions moved through Harlem without leaving paper trails. He saw cops on payroll, politicians taking envelopes, judges fixing cases. It was bigger than anyone at the Times had imagined, and slowly Sterling started asking about the man at the top, Bumpy Johnson. "You don't ask about Mr. Johnson," Jerome warned him. "You do your job, keep quiet, and maybe someday he notices you exist." But Sterling couldn't help himself. Bumpy Johnson was the story. Sterling just needed to get closer. That's when Sterling made his first mistake. He started taking pictures. Nothing obvious. A small camera hidden in his jacket. Quick shots of meetings, major players, money changing hands. Evidence that would make his story unshakable. His second mistake was getting greedy. Instead of staying in his lane, Sterling started volunteering for bigger jobs. Deliveries that put him closer to Bumpy's inner circle. Willie noticed. "You're eager, Mike. Maybe too eager. Sometimes eager gets a man in trouble." Sterling should have listened, but the story was too big. He could feel the Pulitzer Prize in his hands. His third mistake was trusting the wrong person. Clarence Lucky Williams was Bumpy's nephew, 24 years old and sharp. Lucky ran messages between Bumpy and his operations, one of the few with regular contact with the man himself. Sterling cultivated Lucky carefully, building trust. After 2 months, Lucky started treating Sterling like a real friend. They played chess in Marcus Garvey Park, talked about everything. Sterling almost forgot he was undercover. That's when Lucky mentioned that Bumpy wanted to meet him. "Mr. Johnson heard good things about you," Lucky said over chess. "Says a man who works hard and keeps quiet is worth knowing. You interested?" Sterling's heart raced, but he kept his voice calm. "Sure. When?" "Tomorrow, noon. Joe's barbershop on 135th. What Sterling didn't know was that Lucky Williams had figured out who he really was 3 weeks earlier. Lucky wasn't just Bumpy's nephew. He was Bumpy's intelligence network. The young man everyone underestimated, whose real job was identifying threats. Lucky had made calls to Pittsburgh, talked to people who knew the real players. Nobody had heard of Michael Patterson. That was problem number 1. Problem number 2 was the way Patterson held his pencil when they played chess. Like a writer, not a hustler. Problem number 3 was the camera. Lucky had spotted it, noticed the unconscious habit of a professional photographer. So when Lucky mentioned the meeting with Bumpy, it wasn't an invitation. It was a trap. November 3rd, 1965. Noon. Sterling walked into Joe's barbershop trying to look casual, like a man about to meet the king of Harlem, not a reporter hunting the biggest story of his career. The barbershop was exactly what he expected. 2 chairs, both occupied. Joe himself was cutting hair for a customer Sterling didn't recognize. The second chair held a man reading a newspaper, face hidden. "You Michael Patterson?" Joe asked without looking up. "Yes, sir." "Have a seat. Be right with you." Sterling sat, looked around. 5 other men in the shop all watching him, not casual watching, focused watching. That's when he noticed the silence. No conversation, no jokes, no normal barbershop chatter. Just the sound of scissors and the rustle of newspaper pages. Joe finished with his customer, who paid and left without a word. The old barber gestured to Sterling. "Come on up." Sterling moved to the chair, settled in. Joe draped the cape around his neck, started preparing his tools. In the mirror, Sterling could see the 5 men clearly now. Hard faces, cold eyes, hands resting in positions that suggested weapons. "So," Joe said, running his hands through Sterling's hair, "Lucky tells me you're from Pittsburgh." "That's right." "Funny thing about Pittsburgh." Joe picked up his straight razor, tested the edge against his thumb. "I got family there. Cousins, uncles, people who know everyone worth knowing in that city's action." Sterling's mouth went dry. "Small world, tiny world." Joe started stropping the razor, long, slow strokes. "Especially when someone claims to be something they're not." In the mirror, Sterling watched Joe's face. Calm, professional, almost bored. The face of a man who'd done this before. "See, my cousin Demetrius, he runs book in Pittsburgh, has for 20 years, knows every player, every hustler, every small-timer trying to make it big. And when I described you to him, you know what he said?" Sterling couldn't speak, couldn't move. "He said he never heard of no Michael Patterson, not in Pittsburgh, not anywhere." Joe raised the razor, positioned it against Sterling's throat. Not cutting, just resting there. A whisper of pressure away from opening his carotid artery. "So the question is, friend, who are you really?" The 5 men moved closer. Sterling could see their reflections in the mirror, surrounding the chair like vultures. "I can explain." "No need." The voice came from the man with the newspaper. He folded it slowly, looked up for the first time. Bumpy Johnson. Sterling had seen photographs, but they didn't capture the presence. The absolute stillness that radiated power. Bumpy was 58 years old, gray at the temples, wearing a simple dark suit. He looked like a businessman, a preacher, a professor. He looked like anything except the most dangerous man in New York City. Michael Sterling, Bumpy said quietly. New York Times, 28 years old, lives on West 84th Street, graduated Columbia Journalism School in 1960. Exposed corruption in the Albany State House, brought down union boss Mickey Torino, wrote the series on police brutality that got 3 officers fired. Bumpy's voice was conversational, almost friendly. Your editor, Frank Morrison, has been trying to get someone inside my operation for 5 years. You're the 3rd reporter he's sent. The other 2 had the good sense to give up when they realized they were out of their depth. Sterling found his voice. What happened to the others? Bumpy smiled, not threatening, genuinely amused. Nothing. They got smart, went back to their desks, found other stories. Jimmy Martinez? He wasn't one of ours. He was freelancing, trying to sell information to the feds and the Italians at the same time. Very dangerous game. Joe's razor was still at Sterling's throat. One twitch, one moment of fear or panic, and this conversation would end very differently. The question, Bumpy continued, is what happens to you? Sterling looked in the mirror, met Bumpy's eyes. I suppose that depends on you. No, it depends on you. See, Mr. Sterling, you spent 3 months in my neighborhood. You saw how we operate, met my people, learned my business. You could go back to your newspaper and write your story, expose everything, ruin lives, destroy families. Bumpy leaned forward. Or you could understand something most people don't. The numbers game isn't about crime. It's about hope. Poor people betting nickels and dimes on the chance that maybe this week they can pay their rent, feed their children, buy medicine for their grandmother. And you take their money. I give them a chance. The state lottery takes their money and gives them nothing but false promises. I pay out when they win. I protect them from loan sharks and dirty cops. I make sure their neighborhoods stay safe. Sterling's reporter instincts kicked in despite the razor at his throat. But it's illegal. So was helping slaves escape. So was women voting. So was sitting at lunch counters. Bumpy's voice hardened slightly. Legal doesn't mean right, Mr. Sterling, and illegal doesn't mean wrong. Joe, Bumpy said, and the barber's hand tightened on the razor. Give the man a shave, but be careful. We wouldn't want any accidents. For 15 minutes, Sterling sat motionless while Joe worked. The razor moved expertly across his face, removing 3 months of deliberate stubble, revealing the soft skin of a man who'd never done real physical labor. With each stroke, Michael Patterson disappeared, and Michael Sterling emerged. You know what I think? Bumpy said as Joe worked. I think you came to Harlem expecting to find monsters, criminals who prey on their own people, thugs with guns and no conscience. The razor swept under Sterling's chin, dangerously close to vital arteries. Instead, you found community. You found men who protect their neighborhoods because nobody else will. You found a system that works, that keeps families fed and safe, even if it operates outside laws written by people who've never been poor, never been desperate, never been black in America. Joe finished, wiped Sterling's face clean, removed the cape. In the mirror, Sterling barely recognized himself. 3 months of transformation, erased in 15 minutes. You have a choice, Mr. Sterling, Bumpy said, standing. Write your story. Destroy what we've built here. Watch families lose their only source of hope because some newspaper decided their survival was less important than headlines. Bumpy walked to the door, paused. Or understand that some stories are too important to tell. Some secrets serve a greater good. And if I choose wrong? Bumpy's smile was cold now. There is no wrong choice, Mr. Sterling. There's just choice, but remember this, every choice has consequences. And in Harlem, consequences have a way of coming home. The 5 men filed out behind Bumpy, leaving Sterling alone with Joe. The old barber began cleaning his tools, humming softly. That man, Sterling said quietly. He's not what I expected. Joe looked up. What did you expect? A criminal. A thug. He's a protector. The most dangerous kind of man there is, because he protects what matters. Sterling left the barbershop with his mind spinning. He had the story. 3 months of inside access, photographs, recordings, enough evidence to expose Bumpy Johnson's entire operation. But he also had understanding. He'd seen how the numbers money flowed through the community. Rent paid for families facing eviction, medical bills covered for children who needed surgery, college tuition for bright kids with no options. The numbers game wasn't just gambling. It was Harlem's social safety net. Sterling went back to his apartment, sat at his typewriter, started writing, then stopped, started again, stopped again. 3 weeks later, Frank Morrison called Sterling into his office. "Where's my story?" "There isn't one." "You spent 3 months inside their operation." Sterling looked his editor in the eye. "I spent 3 months learning that some stories shouldn't be told. This is the biggest story we've ever gotten close to. It's also the wrong story." Sterling walked out of Morrison's office, cleaned out his desk, and left the New York Times. He never wrote about Bumpy Johnson, never exposed the numbers operation. Instead, he became a teacher, moved to Harlem, taught journalism at a small college, spent his career helping young reporters understand the difference between truth and facts. Years later, a student asked him about the biggest story he never wrote. Sterling smiled, touched his throat where Joe's razor had rested, and said, "Sometimes the most important thing a journalist can do is know when not to publish." Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. At his funeral, thousands lined the streets of Harlem. In the back of the crowd, Michael Sterling stood quietly, paying respects to a man who'd taught him that power isn't about forcing people to listen to your story. It's about knowing which stories deserve to be told.